authorized to declare a recess at any time. We welcome everyone here today, and today's hearing is on radio music and copyrights. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. It's not Groundhog Day, ladies and gentlemen, but we've been here before. Today, among other things, we'll examine the long-standing and significant issue of our copyright laws that have persisted for nearly 100 years. In those 100 years, the radio music industry, which this year celebrated the 100th anniversary, not only of a number of other issues, but the Radio Manufacturers Association, of which I was once the chairman, turned 100 this year. But in those years, we recognize that AM and FM radio has believed and been able to convince Congress that performers should not be compensated for their performances when done on terrestrial radio, because in fact, the performance is in fact a promotion for which no royalty should be paid. This flies in the face of virtually every other country in the world. We all recognize the invaluable role that radio plays in American history. Without a doubt, AM and FM radio has brought us news, weather, sports. Oddly enough, when it brings you news, they pay for those words to be spoken. When it brings you weather, they pay for those words to be spoken. When it brings you sports, you better believe sportscasters get paid for that. As a matter of fact, the late Rush Limbaugh never made less during the height of his career than $30 million a year for that amazing voice and those ideas. But were those ideas more creative than of that of our witness here today, Mr. Randy Travis? The fact is, we are here once again to ask why it is that U.S. joins the likes of North Korea, Iran, and Cuba in not recognizing public performance right in radio music broadcast. Even China recently modernized its copyright law to provide for performance right for sound recordings. But China will join the many others, including France, for example, in denying an estimated $70 to $100 million in royalties that are taken overseas but not paid to our artists. And I point out France, where I was just a few days ago. France collects the royalties. Their radio stations make a profit while collecting the royalties, or paying the royalties, I should say. But those royalties go to the government, which then promotes the arts and tourism with them. Again, denying American performers who performed in those countries. This injustice has persisted for too long. That's why I introduced the American Music Fairness Act, AMFA, with the full committee ranking member, Mr. Nadler of New York. I know that we have been here before, and I know that it looks like, why would you do this? And the answer is, every year we must do the right thing until ultimately the right thing is done by these creative performers for what they have been doing. It's not new. When I learned that Frank Sinatra came and stood on the steps of the Capitol a very long time ago, not because he needed it, he didn't need the money, it's because he earned it, and because others who needed it far more than him were not getting it. He stood up for the little guy, and we should all do that today. We continue with that tradition with our witnesses, all of whom are famous in their own towns and their own homes, but none like Randy Travis. And I want to thank you particularly, and his wife Mary, for the extra effort it took to be here today, and for your indulgence when I perhaps stray into some of your latest works in an effort to make the American people more aware of it. And with that, I recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Johnson of Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Music is incredibly important to the economy of the nation and to Georgia. And many recording artists call my district home. Atlanta, Georgia is the capital of hip hop and R&B with a vibrant network of creators, writers, music labels, recording studios, and music venues. But that is just the beginning. Creators in Georgia are making music in everything from rap to bluegrass to gospel to classical music. Georgia Tech found that in 2016, the music industry in Georgia generated $3.5 billion and employed over 16,000 people. Today, Georgia's music industry supports an estimated over 45,000 jobs with over 13,000 royalty recipients and over 91,000 songwriters. While the music industry contributes significantly to our economy on the individual level, it is difficult to be an up-and-coming musical artist today. It is difficult to keep up a steady stream of gigs, and it's even more difficult to break through as an emerging artist. Rather than the glorious and glamorous lifestyle that some might imagine, music creators often are working class, bartending at night and recording during the day. New advancements in technology and changes in the way music is consumed have only made the rich richer and the poor poorer. When Congress created performance royalties for digital distribution of musical works in 1995, it exempted terrestrial radio. It did so in part because after hearing a song, listeners who liked it could head to their nearest music store to buy the whole album. There was a clear benefit to both parties, the station and the performer. But if you look at American towns today, you won't see music stores at the mall, no CD sections at your local big box store, and that's because music consumption has moved from buying albums to streaming individual songs. Clearly, the world has changed, and the question is how those changes impact the broader ecosystem. We know that as technology develops and industries evolve, statutory arrangements that at first worked for everyone begin to be less balanced. Looking back over the last 20 years of music industry evolution, it is clear now more than ever that we must work together to address the issue of radio broadcast performance rights. It goes without saying that artists should be compensated for their work. Artists, particularly working class artists, need steady royalty streams because they can't always rely on the other ways of making money from their craft. But in addressing the issue of radio broadcast performance rights, we must also be sure that we are addressing the concern of the broadcasters and all those involved in local radio. Local radio stations and their hosts raise important health and social issues, support local journalism, and provide much needed information on emergency services during national disasters. At home, my constituents have V103 FM, its sister station WAOK AM, and Streets 94.5 to name a few. Atlantans who want to listen to hip hop can turn to 97.1 FM The River, and those interested in classic rock can turn the dial a few clicks to Magic 107.5. Obviously, all the different parties involved in this issue are differently situated with respect to being able to accommodate change. But we cannot seesaw between unfairness for one party and unfairness for another party and call it progress. I believe it is through hearings like this that we are able to work together to resolve this long-standing issue and explore how to fairly compensate creators going forward. I look forward to hearing from the witnesses if and how they believe Congress should act to ensure that every part of the music industry, from the gospel singers to the classic rock radio stations, are properly supported as technology changes the way we consume our favorite songs. I thank the witnesses again for their time.
Hey, can I be your witness? I wanna testify, baby. I made a track. Pay me. I need paid. Now, I made a country music song through AI once. No, wait a minute, twice. And wrote another rap song called Click Bang Boom. You dig? I need paid, motherfuckers. Who protected my rights? I want reparations.
Today, especially to the Travises for making it here to Washington, D.C., and we look forward to hearing your testimony as well as the other testimony. Thank you. And thank you for your contribution to the culture also.
I thank the gentleman. We now recognize my partner in the legislation, the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Nadler of New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, when American workers clock out and sit down behind the wheel of their cars to drive home every evening or get on the subway, they can be instantly transported to rock concerts, jam sessions, and solo performances just by turning on their radio. Scrolling through the stations, they can hear country twang, operatic arias, and classical violin pieces performed through their car speakers. On New York FM radio, listeners can go from the Supremes to Miles Davis with only a few clicks of the dial. The music is different, but all of these examples have one thing in common. The artist is not being paid for the performance. Under American copyright law, the owner of a sound recording of a musical work does not receive royalty payments when the song is played on terrestrial AM/FM radio. That same recording generates income for the artist when distributed over any other medium, from satellite radio and streaming services to public venues and restaurants. There is no reason terrestrial radio should be treated differently from all other music platforms, and certainly not at the expense of artists forced to allow the distribution of their intellectual property for free. Creators whose performances are broadcast over terrestrial radio are not just famous performers currently in the Billboard Top 100. Working-class musicians struggling to make ends meet have, for decades, formed the backbone of the creative economy. But increasing inequities have made it harder and harder for those creators to make a living wage. Hourly workers living paycheck to paycheck may hear their own songs on the radio, but not receive a cent for it. The same goes for artists who no longer perform at all, whether because musical tastes change, or more poignantly, because the performer ages or faces personal tragedy that makes them no longer able to perform. Terrestrial radio stations can play the products of their life's work without the artist seeing a penny. We are honored to welcome Randy Travis here today to share his experience with illness that rendered him unable to sing, and I look forward to his testimony about how the lack of performance royalties has impacted his ability to earn a living. Finally, the failure of U.S. law to establish a performance right on terrestrial radio means that our singers and other musicians miss out on royalties when the music is broadcast overseas. Nearly every other developed nation in the world compensates performers for playing their music on terrestrial radio. But since we do not have a similar performance right at home, American artists do not receive royalties when their music is played abroad. This alone deprives U.S. artists of up to $200 million annually. Those who argue that this statutory omission somehow inures to the benefit of artists, who get free publicity and an expanded audience, are missing the crucial understanding that the world around them has changed. If the system ever were fair, it certainly is not now. As the music industry has evolved with technology over time, so too have the inequities brought about by broadcasters' exemptions from copyright royalties. For many years, the public purchased physical copies of recordings, whether in vinyl, cassette, or CD. When you heard a song on the radio, you might go out and buy the whole album. But today, teenagers no longer flock to stores to buy the latest album. In 2023, over 72% of U.S. music revenue came from streaming services. There is no reason whatsoever that artists should receive different treatment when their songs are played on the radio or streamed online. That is why I was proud to join Chairman Issa in introducing the American Music Fairness Act. AMFA would require broadcast radio stations to pay copyright royalties to performing artists, record labels, and other sound recording copyright owners for the right to transmit their music over the air. The bill was carefully constructed to ensure that smaller radio stations pay less than large ones, based on the annual revenue generated by the stations and their parent organizations. It is long past time for performers to be fairly compensated, and I hope that we can advance this legislation soon. While the absence of a performer's right costs our economy millions of dollars each year, this is not a monetary question alone. Artists, labels, and the overall health of arts in America all suffer for the absence of fairness in the system. I'm grateful to Chairman Issa for his work to ensure artists receive the royalties they are owed, and I thank both the Chairman and Ranking Member Johnson for holding this important hearing today. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. It is now my pleasure to introduce our witnesses, and I want to take a point of personal privilege and thanks to the fact that this is a very balanced and thorough. We have creative individuals. We have obviously the sound exchanges here, and we appreciate them. But we also have representatives both of the industry and Mr. Harrell, who represents a huge number of stations. This, in fact, shows a fairness to at least engage in the dialogue, and for that, I'm grateful. You may not always feel like it today, but I am very appreciative. With that, I'd like to introduce, this is a great honor, and the rest of you will have to live in his shadow, Mr. Randy Travis, who is beyond an exceptionally accomplished musician, having released 7 and if I get them wrong, correct me, Mary, 7 platinum or multi-platinum albums, and received 7 Grammy Awards, 11 Academy of Country Music, 10 American Music Awards, 8 Dove Awards from Gospel Music Association, and too many others to name. He was the 2016 inductee into the Country Hall of Fame, founder of Randy Travis Foundation, and this charity is dedicated to raising awareness for stroke and aphasia, and provides art and music enrichment for children. And the list goes on for both of the Travises, and I want to thank you for being here. This was not easy for you to get here. Nothing personal, but Mr. Curtis Lejay is the president and CEO of the National Association of Broadcasters, which advocates on behalf of all the terrestrial radio and television stations nationwide, and has worked with the association for more than 10 years in his role as the chief operating officer and executive vice president for government relations. Prior to joining the NAB, he served as senior counsel for then Chairman Patrick Leahy, the Senate Judiciary. So he knows the routine here. He knows that it's all about the fairness of the questions and the fairness of the answers, and we appreciate, again, your being here. Mr. Michael Huppy is the president and chief executive officer of Sound Exchange, and I apologize, but the order here is different. And an organization dedicated to administering under Section 114 sound recording licenses. To date, Sound Exchange has distributed, get this, $11 billion for digital performance royalties. Over 700,000 music creators have received, I guess, what is no longer checks, but in fact transfers. He's also an adjunct professor at Georgetown Law School, where he teaches music law. Mr. Eddie Harrell is the regional vice president and general manager of Radio One with markets in Ohio. Radio One, an Urban One company, is one of the largest media companies in the United States. It also serves African Americans through radio, television, and digital properties. Mr. Harrell also serves as the chair of the Otterbein University Board of Trustees, vice chair of the Ohio Association of Broadcasters, and is on the National Board of Directors for NAB, and represents my hometown, which the ranking member got them all, but WERE, that I grew up listening to as you know for years. And by the way, live, a lot of broadcasts they've been great. I want to welcome all of our witnesses. As those who have been here before know, we will take your entire statement plus any additional material you want to give to us in for the record. But we do ask you to try to limit your opening remarks to 5 minutes. Because of the limitations that the stroke has placed on Mr. Travis, Mary Travis will serve as both a principal witness on her own behalf and at times may speak for Randy. I'm going to ask one indulgence. Can I call you Mary and Randy?
Absolutely.
Oh, that's made my day. The other guys will call you Mr. Pursuant to the rule, if I could ask you all to be sworn in, Mr. Travis, you do not need to rise, but if you'll raise your right hand and take the oath, please. Do you all swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give will be true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Thank you. You may all be seated. Please let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. Again, not as an accommodation, but because I'm in awe of the creative work. Mary, between the two of you, however you want to handle your opening statement, you're recognized for it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Randy is right side paralysis, so he couldn't raise his hand. I apologize.
He gave me a good left-handed snug, so he's still got a lot of strength there.
He does. He does. Chairman Issa, thank you for having us. Ranking Member Johnson, members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity and this honor to testify today on behalf of all artists and musicians in support of the American Music Fairness Act. What would sheet music sound like without a voice? And what would radio sound like without a song? This piece of legislation is essential to correct a 100-year-old issue regarding artists and non-payment for their work performed on the most prominent music platform in America, one of which they helped to build and sustain. My name is Mary Travis. I'm wife and voice of Randy Travis. I'm kind of like a bad version of AI, but with consent. He's the good one. Even though a massive stroke in 2013 left him with aphasia, making it difficult to speak, his commitment to music is clear and very resolute. 11 years ago, at age 54, Randy was stricken with viral cardiomyopathy, leading to pneumonia, flatlining life support, massive stroke, coma, brain surgeries, intubation, tracheotomies, feeding tubes, collapsed lungs, staph, sepsis, serratia, pseudomonas, aphasia, right side paralysis, 6 months in a hospital stay, a loss of a third of his body weight, followed by years of daily rehab. We would be in and out of the hospital and bedridden the rest of our life, is what we were told after given 1% to 2% chance of survival. But he didn't listen to that, and instead he rolled right back into the industry he loves so much. Dwayne Allen of the Oak Ridge Boys told him when he came to see us in the hospital, he said, "Well, I guess the devil don't want you and God ain't ready for you yet." Anyway, music is, was, and always will be his lifeline. But that lifeline has changed, and we need to acknowledge that. The days of Randy packing a car and tracking across thousands of miles throughout the country to visit radio stations and deliver copies of his newest cut cassette in hopes of having his music heard are things of the past. The advent of streaming has all but replaced physical records and CD sales, and there are no guarantees that listeners are running out to buy concerts and t-shirts. Folks can hear all the music they want on demand for pennies a day. Of all the things that we do differently than we did a century ago, one thing remains the same, and that is that the voice is still the mandatory bridge between the writer and the listener. And it's time to do right by the ones that created that sound, that melody, that emotion that keeps the listeners coming back and the advertisers buying into radio. Passing AMFA bill would make many old wrongs finally right. Artists, musicians, and producers would receive a gratuity for their work. Artists would be much more inclined to collaborate with stations on projects and events. All other platforms would be more understanding of the level playing field. Artists can spend more time with their family and less time on the road. And the size and the nature of the radio station will determine the scaled fee starting at just $10 a year, structured to protect and assure continued success for stations of all sizes. You have the power to change this. And better sooner than later, as we are staring AI technology squarely in the face. Artificial intelligence, and I call it artistic intelligence, because it enabled Randy to release a new song utilizing AI in its most authentic and artistic way. It's the first song ever recorded and released with full artist consent and involvement in a studio setting. His Warner Music Nashville label, producer, musicians, vocalist, and Randy were all present. This is good AI, but there is bad, no, there's terrible AI out there, and it's increasing exponentially daily. It's estimated that there's 179,000 songs, unauthorized AI songs, posted on the internet already. We ask your help in righting the wrong for legacy artists and creating a more prosperous future for the next generation of artists. Passing the American Federation Fairness Act, then moving forward with a thoughtful approach to putting AI protections in place would be positive steps to ensure that artists are paid for their work, their identity is theirs alone, and the soundtracks of our lives continue to play on forever and ever. Amen. We appreciate your time and your consideration as you reflect back on the songs that you celebrate, a certain time, a certain place, a person in your life. The artist will tell you, in fact, that it was their honor to create them for you. Thank you for your service to this great United States of America, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mary. Mr. Lachey.
Good afternoon, Chairman Issa, Ranking Members Nadler and Johnson, and members of the IP Subcommittee. My name is Curtis Leggett, and I'm proud to testify today on behalf of the NAB's more than 5,100 free local radio stations that serve your communities every day. It's an honor to appear today alongside such an esteemed panel, but particularly Eddie Harrell of Radio 1. Founded by Kathy Hughes more than 4 decades ago, Radio 1 is the country's largest urban radio broadcaster and embodies the very best of our industry. I'm also pleased to testify alongside the legendary Randy and Mary Travis. I grew up in awe of Randy's talent, and I'm grateful for what his team has recently accomplished using artificial intelligence so that a whole new generation can experience Randy's music. For over 100 years, broadcasters across the country have been privileged to play great music like Randy's on our stations, where we expose artists to new listeners and engage them with one-of-a-kind interviews in partnership with local performance venues. But we are more than that. We inform, educate, and alert listeners to important events, issues, and emergencies. We entertain listeners with sports and talk radio, and we are local, involved in our communities, and proud to serve the public interest. Radio stations' critical role as fact-based first informers and emergency lifelines has never been more important than it is today. With online misinformation and disinformation threatening to upend our upcoming elections, and the seemingly constant deluge of natural disasters and cell phone outages, local radio remains trusted, always on, and freely available without an expensive subscription or data service. Of course, you cannot talk about the power of broadcast radio without recalling the countless artists whose careers were made when their first song played on our airwaves, or our listeners whose memories are indelibly intertwined with a song playing on their favorite station. Performers across diverse genres have shared the incredible and unforgettable feeling of hearing their songs on the radio. Even amidst drastic changes in the media landscape, broadcast radio continues to drive music discovery for both new musicians and legacy artists. Unfortunately, the so-called American Music Fairness Act would undermine our indispensable medium and this mutually beneficial relationship. AMFA would impose a new royalty on local radio that is financially untenable for broadcasters of all sizes. Such an abrupt change in law would be wholly inconsistent with Congress's long-held approach to copyright policy, where updates have been made to account for new emerging technologies. It would be virtually unprecedented for Congress to upend copyright laws that have governed decades-long relationships and on which entire industries have been built and relied upon for over a century. Radio invests considerable sums in producing content, employing on-air talent, and updating the equipment needed to run successful stations. Radio also pays substantial FCC regulatory fees and already pays hundreds of millions of dollars in annual copyright royalties to performing rights organizations like ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, and GMR, and streaming collectives like Sound Exchange. Without charging expensive subscription fees like our streaming and satellite competitors, local radio is supported by advertising alone. And with big tech having used their market power to siphon away local advertising revenue, a new performance royalty could spell the end for many local stations. For these reasons, 250 members of Congress, including 225 House members and 12 members of this committee, have co-sponsored the Local Radio Freedom Act, a resolution that opposes any new fee or tax on local radio. We are grateful for their support. Mr. Chairman, as you know, NAB stands ready and willing to engage in good faith discussions on a holistic legislative proposal that enhances our unique value to artists without diminishing our ability to serve your constituents. In the meantime, Congress has repeatedly considered and chosen not to impose the recording industry's one-sided performance royalty proposal on free local radio, and this committee should do so again today. Thank you for inviting me to testify. While this hearing's title focuses on the singular legislative issue on which the radio and recording industries disagree, I hope it also affords the opportunity to discuss the many areas of shared interest between our industries, including the novel threats and opportunities posed by generative AI. By rehashing old fights today, let's not sour the opportunity for consensus that has been the critical ingredient for all major changes in IP law in the modern era. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hoppe.
Thank you, Chairman Issa, Ranking Members Nadler and Johnson, and members of the subcommittee. It is an honor to be here today to testify in support of the American Music Fairness Act. This bill seeks to finally remedy the egregious fact that the United States is the only democratic nation in the world without a performance right for artists on AM/FM radio. I've had the privilege of representing American artists around the world, and when I speak to other industrialized countries, Mr. Chairman, quite frankly, it is an embarrassment that the United States, a country that is a leader in intellectual property and protecting free expression, denies this most fundamental right to the people who make its music. IP is a huge portion of our GDP and one of our biggest exports, yet we deny this critical economic right to cherished creators like Randy Travis. It is shocking that the United States stands in the company of countries like North Korea, Iran, and Cuba in not paying artists when their songs are played on AM/FM radio. Even Russia and China, with their horrible IP records, have a public performance right for sound recordings. The current system in the United States is so broken that a touch of a button on the dashboard determines whether or not an artist like Randy gets paid. That means if you're driving in your car and you turn on satellite radio, Randy gets paid. If you switch to the streaming service on your phone, Randy gets paid. But if you listen to the same song on an FM station, Randy gets nothing. That, Mr. Chairman, is indefensible. Same music, same product, same consumer experience, but radically different treatment under US law. Apple, Spotify, Pandora, SiriusXM, even TikTok and YouTube pay the performer. But AM/FM, a service that 88% of Americans listen to every week, gets a pass due to a 100-year-old loophole. To put it bluntly, Mr. Chairman, for over a century, AM/FM radio has been stealing the music. Last year alone, radio made $15 billion in revenue, and not a dime of that went to the artists that draw the crowd. Why? Because the broadcasters hide behind the outdated concept of promotion, which is ironic given that 72% of music on the radio today is not even new music. Yet even to the extent there may be some promotion, that should never justify a mandatory, unpermissioned taking of the music. You must obtain a license to make a movie based on a book. You must get the rights from Major League Baseball to broadcast a Nationals game. These are both clearly promotional. Why should music be any different? Mr. Chairman, Congress must set a standard that creators need to be compensated whenever and wherever their music is played, especially when their creations form the backbone of the business model like they do for AM/FM radio. And this is going to be even more critical as the music industry takes on artificial intelligence. And to add insult to injury, because the US doesn't have a performance right, Americans lose out on royalties overseas. For example, when Randy Travis has a song played over the radio in Paris, the French collect royalties on that music. But instead of paying Randy, that money is diverted to French artists and French cultural funds. We estimate that artists lose almost $300 million of taxable US income each year because we lack these protections in the US. And this is on top of the hundreds of millions of dollars they are already missing out on domestically. After listening to Mary share Randy's incredible story, I don't know how anyone can look Randy in the eye and say he doesn't deserve to be paid for his life's work. And for every big name artist, there are hundreds of smaller artists, backup singers, session musicians, studio producers, mixers, and others who have helped make the music timeless, but who never made a penny from it being played on radio. In fact, the dozen states represented on this subcommittee have over 100,000 music creators who would be eligible for royalties over AM/FM radio if this legislation was enacted. Mr. Chairman, the concepts embodied in AMFA have been supported by every administration since President Carter, including both the Biden and Trump administrations. That should tell you something. And just two days ago, the U.S. Conference of Mayors passed a resolution at their annual meeting in support of AMFA. I leave you with this. In the 2 hours or so during which this hearing will take place, over 200,000 songs will be played on terrestrial radio, and the artists who perform the songs won't get paid for it. Those artists are your constituents, your neighbors, your family and friends. I hope that Congress will finally fix this problem and make things right for all the music artists in this country. They certainly deserve it after everything they have given to us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hurrell.
Greetings, Chairs Jordan and Issa, ranking members Nadler and Johnson, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Eddie Hurrell Jr., and I am testifying on behalf of Radio 1, where I oversee our local operations in Columbus, Cincinnati, and Cleveland, while still managing the day-to-day operations of the latter. As someone who runs multiple stations that uniquely serve our listening audience and values the collaborative partnership we have with recording artists and connecting with our communities, make no mistake that a new performance royalty imposed on local stations would create harm for local stations, listeners, and the recording industry itself. A little bit about our company. Media pioneer Kathy Hughes founded Radio 1 in 1980 and built it into the largest urban radio network today. Ms. Hughes, or Miss H as we call her, started as an administrative assistant, working her way up and becoming Howard University's radio's first woman vice president and general manager, which was WHUR right here in Washington, D.C. Her leadership was instrumental in creating unique WHUR programming like The Quiet Storm radio segment, which is now a staple and uniquely reflected the sound and style of the Washington, D.C. community. As anyone who has tried to start a new business knows, it's never easy. After being denied it 32 times by various banks and overcoming significant other hardships, Ms. H persevered to become a single station owner and develop a winning formula for what became Radio 1. That family business now encompasses more than 70 radio stations across 13 markets in urban America, including but not limited to Atlanta, Baltimore, Cleveland, Houston, Philadelphia, Raleigh, Durham, Richmond, and here in Washington, D.C. Today, Radio 1, now led by Ms. Hughes' son, Alfred Liggins, reaches 17 million weekly listeners and connects 1 million annual local event attendees with music and musicians that they love. Radio 1 also employs more than 1,200 people who come to work every day to make a difference in the lives of our listeners. Radio stations like ours provide a uniquely free service and connect everyday Americans. At Radio 1, we are the source for the latest music in R&B, hip-hop, and gospel. In short, we inform, we inspire, we entertain. Not only does radio provide an invaluable source of daily news and entertainment, radio also serves as a trusted voice during natural disasters or emergency situations. In Cleveland, we have consistently served as a conduit for communication between the mayor and the police chief and the general public. Our ability to connect as a trusted voice in times of public emergencies is vital in all of our markets. Radio also provides a key platform for recording artists. I am proud of the real-life partnership that exists between radio and the recording industry. Broadcasters around the country are known for putting the spotlight on new, upcoming artists and therefore serving as an integral part of artist promotion. This continued relevance of radio and the value proposition is affirmed in the everyday life of mine running the radio stations. The record labels are contacting us to promote new artists and music, looking for airplay to help launch the next hit. And while we embrace this promotion platform, our partnership with the recording industry goes much deeper than airplay. Often tell the story about a little-known upcoming trio who performed in Cleveland at Z107.9 Summer Jam in 2014. Before they performed, I had not heard of Migos. However, after the performance of Summer Jam, everyone in Cleveland and in the world soon experienced the generational hip-hop talent of Quavo, Offset, and the late great Takeoff. This is just one example that illustrates the power of the collaboration between radio, the recording industry, and free promotion. Not surprisingly, none of our community investments go without a cost. Today, local broadcasters are competing against tech behemoths and global streaming services who, ironically, would use new AI tools to attempt to replicate the unique sounds and service of local radio. Imposing a new performance royalty on our uniquely free service would diminish the music we play for our audience, decrease our investment in staff and community service, and ultimately lead to less competition against global streamers and the destruction of an incredible promotional platform that benefits artists. And yes, radio will use AI to find new efficiencies in our back office operations, but AI will not replace the soul of local broadcasting, which is the people who work at our stations and serve our communities. Nor will AI replicate the entrepreneurial spirit or programming genius of Ms. Hughes. Fake Drake will never take the stage at our Summer Jam. Radio 1 and local radio stations continue to thrive by serving our audiences in uniquely local and human ways. In conclusion, I applaud the majority of the House that supports the Local Radio Freedom Act and encourages this committee to refrain from imposing a performance royalty. To do otherwise would jeopardize local radio stations, employing local staff, keep upcoming artists from breaking into the recording industry, and harm Americans across the country who rely on free local radio for news, entertainment, talk, sports, and reliable information. Thank you for inviting me to testify today. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. I thank all the witnesses. We now go to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Fitzgerald, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Leggett, do radio stations already pay royalties for sound recordings as a result of some of the online streaming that the stations broadcast themselves? Just trying to get clarity on that.
So radio stations across the board, both for our terrestrial airplay and webcasting, pay significant performance royalties that go to the songwriter. So those are paid through ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, and GMR in the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. We also pay an additional royalty on the sound recording to Sound Exchange when those performances take place online.
So would it then be fair to say that the radio stations, they would have to make like 2 separate payments? Is that what this would result in if we move forward?
That is exactly right. And it has already proven extremely difficult for local broadcast stations in the webcasting context to innovate online due to the burdensome costs that those additional royalties pose to innovate. Fact is, it would be devastating to add those additional royalties to the terrestrial airplay when we are already generating such significant promotional value to artists.
Mr. Huppy, well, this hearing is about the public performance rights for terrestrial radio, some stakeholders have argued that passing American Music Fairness Act would be the first step in getting rid of all transmission and retransmission exemptions granted in the Digital Performance Right in Sound Recordings Act of 1995. This is concerning, and you know what, I guess what's coming, because of restaurants and bars. And how do you guys view that, or what's your take on that right now, kind of as we sit here today?
Sure, Congressman, that's an excellent question. I've worked in the industry for 20 years, and the recording industry has been fighting this fight for 80 years. It is, has, and will always be about terrestrial radio and making sure that everybody gets paid fairly for their content. We want to make sure that this is a technology-neutral solution and that big broadcasters do not get a break from paying what every other competitor has to pay. You bring up restaurants and bars, those are different. You know, Congressman, people go to restaurants to have food and dine with their family. They go to bars to share a communal drink. People listen to music radio for one reason, to listen to music radio. Radio is different from all of those others, and that is the focus today and the injustice that we are trying to resolve.
So, Mr. Leggett, let me go back to you. Proponents of the bill argue that American artists are losing that $300 million a year, which was brought up earlier in overseas revenue. I mean, I'm sympathetic to that argument, and I think we should be doing what we can to ensure artists like Mr. Travis are being paid what he deserves in that work, even though it's being performed or played abroad. But it's not clear to me whether major record labels are already collecting those international performance royalties from or for the American artists.
Thank you for the question. So, first of all, we are sympathetic. If there is any U.S. performing artist that is owed dollars that are sitting overseas that they are entitled to under that foreign country's laws, we certainly agree that those should be collected. Trying to compare the broadcast recording industry relationship in the United States to that in any other country is an unfair comparison. But I think you allude to the right thing. When we have tried to dig into what that number looks like, has been very hard to substantiate, and I think it is an appropriate question for the recording industry as to how their international subsidiaries are already collecting those dollars. I don't have that answer, but certainly understand it to be the reality of today's marketplace.
Yeah, whether it's Randy Travis or any other artist, what I'm trying to determine is whether publishers like Warner, who operate globally, are already collecting performance royalties abroad on behalf of their American artists, and instead of transferring it back to the artist, are simply using it to offset, I don't know how else to describe it, their overseas operations, right? I mean, what would be your comment on that, I guess?
My understanding would be clearly, would be purely secondary, and I think those are questions more appropriately directed to the record labels. But I can tell you that anecdotally, we've certainly heard as much.
Congressman, if I may elaborate on that, Sound Exchange actually has 50 to 60 reciprocal agreements around the world. We have agreements covering 85% of the planet with organizations who do what we do in other countries. And in many cases, in some cases, there are some collection in country by country from the labels, but in many cases, there is no collection. Sometimes that includes artist performances, but most often it's the artists like Randy who really lose out on this across the board. As I said, our estimates based upon the data we have is up to $300 million a year is left overseas and not repatriated to this country.
Thank you all very much. I yield.
I thank the gentleman. We now go to the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Nadler, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Huppy, when Congress extended copyright procedures for sound recordings in 1971, it did so in part because of the increasing piracy of records and tapes, then relatively new technologies. According to a contemporary House report, piracy caused over $100 million in economic losses at the time. Similarly, when Congress extended digital performance rights in 1995, this committee presciently found that, quote, the digital transmission of sound recordings is likely to become a very important outlet for the performance of recorded music in the near future, close quote. It went on to say that without appropriate copyright protection in the digital environment, the creation of new sound recordings and musical works could be discouraged. ultimately denying the public some of the potential benefits of new digital transmission technologies. We changed the law in 1971 because the evolution of technology had created a system that was unfair to artists and the listening public. We changed the law again in 1995 because once more new technologies were making it harder for artists to make a living. Do we have a similar argument today that the music ecosystem has changed?
Thank you, Congressman. We absolutely have a similar argument today. Streaming is a huge part of the U.S. recorded music revenue today. It's 85% of revenue into the entire industry comes through streaming. We live in a world where 40, 50 years ago, it was a sales-based model and everything was done to purchase, to drive purchases of CDs and albums. Now, 85% of U.S. revenue comes from streaming. And that is exactly what we're here about today, because that is, the broadcasters are the one platform that doesn't pay for that delivery method that now serves a huge majority of the U.S. music industry.
Mr. Travis and Ms. Travis, as a country music star considered the voice of classic country, your performances are regularly played on AM/FM radio. Why is it important to your long-term care that you receive royalties not just from streaming services, but also from terrestrial radio?
The royalties, since his stroke, the royalties are what we have counted on for income for survival for his long-term care. It's also important to note that we are here not just for us. We're 65. We're kind of on the other side of it. But the younger artists that are coming along with families that are looking forward to a career in music, we want to do it for them. We want them to know that they have a career ahead of them, one that they can look forward to, one that they know they're not giving away their music or their identity or their copyrighted material for the radio. Randy loves radio. I want to get that straight. He loves radio and would never have been Randy Travis without the radio at that point in time. That was 40 years ago.
Again, Mr. and Mrs. Travis, while artificial intelligence is not the focus of this hearing, the use of generative AI in the music industry is of strong interest to this committee. Both its potential as a tool for creators and the dangers it may pose when an artist's work or likeness is used without permission or compensation. How has artificial intelligence helped you continue to create?
It's a wonderful question, and it's one that we have just, it's a bridge we've just crossed. Randy has he put out his first song since his stroke 11 years ago, called Where That Came From, and it was using stems from 42 to 45 of his songs that were sent to a company that put his music on top of a vocal bed. So all of the vocal that you hear is Randy's, and it was pretty emotional, to be honest with you. When it came back, he spent months it took us 11 months to do it, and he spent months in the studio with his producer, career-long producer, with Warner Music, with musicians that had played on some of his earlier albums. And so the whole setting was very authentic, artistic, and humanistic. It had all of the heart in it. So it was wonderful to get to hear some more music out of Randy Travis.
Do you believe AI users should be allowed to create unauthorized copies of singers' voice?
Absolutely not.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Huppy, some argue that small broadcasters cannot afford to compensate musicians for the performance of their sound recordings. In your opinion, does the American Music Fairness Act adequately account for that concern?
The American Music Fairness Act absolutely accounts and looks out for small broadcasters. The sponsors of the bill, I think, have gotten the balance exactly right. We recognize the importance of allowing small business to thrive and grow, so we have more competition and more variety in radio. As you know, Congressman Adler, 1.5 stations that make $1.5 million or less will have to pay a mere $500 for all the music they want to use in a year. That's $1.37 a day. And I hasten to note, it's the lowest fee to join the NAB, which they offer to non-commercial outfits. We're offering $1.5 million cap to commercial outlets, and it's less expensive than what it costs a student to go to the NAB radio show,
They can easily
$539.
afford it by not joining the NAB.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
And with that, I'm going to take just 1 minute of a privilege for a good reason.
Eyes like diamonds, you caught the light. Oh, but they were dark and deeper than the night. But when she'd smile, out came the sun. And there ain't no more where that came from.
Now, I would love to play the whole thing, but the chairman is waiting. I now recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan.
I wanted to keep listening. I grew up under the old joke, and on my mom and dad's household there were two kinds of music, country and western, right? That's it is good to be. I apologize, Mr. Chairman, for not being here earlier to do the opening statement. I was actually doing 2 talk radio shows, and so was unable to get here. But I'll enter the statement now. This issue has been before Congress for the past 100 years. It's also been in an impasse for the past 100 years. And I want to thank Chairman Issa for trying to tackle it. We must get this right. As everyone knows, music is interwoven into American history and culture. It's one of our most important cultural exports. Radio is obviously an extremely important institution in America. It's how millions of people get news and entertainment. Back in Ohio, we have some great broadcasters. This committee is entrusted with the jurisdiction over copyright matters, which means that it is up to us to balance the interests and the rights of creators and distributors. Historically, we have only been able to tackle complicated issues like this when everyone is willing to come to the table and find a path forward. In this case, it means balancing the interest of performers to be compensated and accounting for the reliance interest of the broadcast community for the value that they provide. Despite music consumption increasingly moving away from broadcast radio to digital streaming, the issue before us today is still one worthy of our attention. Last Congress, Chairman Nadler organized bipartisan negotiations to try to sort this thing out. Unfortunately, those negotiations stalled, and we never quite got to a resolution. Despite that, we still believe there's a deal to be struck that is fair to all sides, and most importantly, fair to taxpayers and consumers. We've heard from musicians across the spectrum about the importance of being fairly compensated, and we couldn't be more grateful to have legendary country star Randy Travis with us today and his wife to share their perspective. We also have with us Eddie Harrell Jr. from the great state of Ohio to share how broadcasters on the ground are thinking about these issues. Historically, this committee moves copyright legislation on a consensus basis. These issues are not and should not be partisan. So I want to thank again all our witnesses for being here today. I want to thank our chairman for putting this together and all the work he's done on this issue to try to get to a solution. And I look forward to the remaining discussion and debate and questions that come. With that, I would yield back to the chairman. Again, thank you for the time.
Well, I thank the chairman, and since the chairman yielded back to me, I'll just say that, if we want to make a deal here today, you're hearing numbers that you pay that much for your coffee service in a year. So think about that as we go through this, because it really is something where you heard a little piece of that wonderful music that reminded us the great music that was produced for 40 years by Randy. And with that, I think I'm going to the gentlelady from San Jose, Ms. Lofgren.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, and thanks to all the witnesses for being here. It's instructive and also inspiring, Mr. and Mrs. Travis, that you are here. One of the things that we need to guard against when we consider legislation is unintended outcomes. And I realize people have different perspectives, so I want to focus in on one of those issues. Mr. Hupp and Mr. Legate, one of the issues is what impact would this legislation have on the critical role of radio stations in providing emergency broadcasts? Now, Mr. Legate, you argue that paying artists for airplay would come at the expense of investments in emergency broadcast systems, potentially compromising those systems, which would be important to every member of this committee. But Mr. Hupp, you contend that other countries successfully manage to fund both the performance royalties and robust emergency systems. How can you, the two of you, respond to the divergence of opinion that you are presenting here to the committee? If you could each address that briefly, I'd appreciate it.
Well, I think what is, thank you for the question. I think what is most difficult about these comparisons to other countries' regimes is that there is no comparison to the U.S. locally focused, freely available broadcast model in any other country. And this model is time tested, and across our laws, copyright, communications laws, there are special exemptions and special provisions that have been put in place to enable this locally focused service, ensure that we are always on in times of emergency, and ensure that we have a reach that enables us to touch listeners who maybe can't afford an expensive subscription service, don't have adequate broadband service. That is what local broadcast is serving.
No, I understand, but my question really
And so-
has to do with the emergency services.
So local broadcasters across this country are operating on extremely tight margins right now. I don't need to tell anyone on this committee about how disrupted the media landscape is, the degree to which the large tech platforms have siphoned dollars out of local advertising. And we are the numbers for small broadcasters and that treatment that Mr. Huppy referenced earlier, it's a bit of a red herring, because the fact of the matter is, under this proposal, more than 4,000 local broadcast stations would be subject to CRB set rates, which would total, if we apply their precedent here, hundreds of millions of dollars. You're not going to see local service with those kinds of costs.
Mr. Huppy, could you address the same question?
Sure. Thank you, Congresswoman. I would say that you don't even need to look to other countries to find that this is quite manageable for the broadcasters. They have news stations that are required to broadcast emergency services, and yet they manage to make them profitable and pay their talent. They have talk stations that are required to do emergency service broadcasting, and yet they manage to make a profit and pay their talent. They have sports radios that have to do the same thing, and yet they manage to make a profit. So we don't even need to go overseas to look about how this will actually play out in this country. I think they absolutely have the ability to do this if they wanted to. And in terms of radio suffering and having financial problems, in the words of the great Mark Twain, I would say that the reports of radio's demise are greatly exaggerated. This is a $15 billion business in the U.S. 88% of all Americans listen to radio. The biggest broadcast groups are becoming bigger and more powerful. If you look at iHeart's EBITDA for the past 8 years, EBITDA, which is a proxy for profit, they operate in the 24-25% range.
I think we've got the clear divergent views here. Let me just close. Mr. and Mrs. Travis, it was fascinating to hear of your capacity to create new music using AI. AI is going to provide tremendous tools for new things that are, obviously there are risks that we need to be aware of and prevent, but it's also a tremendous tool for good. The Library of Congress is currently, under the registrar of the Copyright Office, examining AI. Obviously, if there's no human component, a machine can't get protection. And so the question is, where is the AI being used as a tool as opposed to creating itself? I'm hoping that you and your husband will weigh in with the registrar, because I think your experience would be instructive for them. We want to be able to empower people to utilize this tool as you have done in a very emotionally moving way. And I just wanted to mention that. It's obscure, but it's important, and I hope you'll have a chance to let the registrar know your experience, because it's important. And Mr. Chairman of the full committee, I'm also a fan of country music. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We now go to the gentleman, Mr. Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses that are here today. Very important discussion, tough discussion. I've talked with both sides of this issue, and great arguments on both sides, and I know that what we really want to do is we want to be able to find that right balance of interests that protects both local radio stations and the talents and efforts of musical artists like the great Randy Travis before us today. But I do want to thank you all for your time and your efforts in this regard. I grew up listening to local radio. As many of you guys know, I'm from East Texas. Everything out there is rural and everything is local. Especially in rural America, local radio stations are important because they're often the only source of local news and information, especially after a severe weather event, literally serving as a lifeline to many of the people in our area. So I want to talk about some of the perspective from the radio stations. I want to start with you, Mr. Leggett, for a moment. Would you talk about the kinds of things that your member companies' radio stations do to promote music and the recording artists who perform it?
Thank you for the question, Congressman, and thank you also for your support of the Local Radio Freedom Act. What makes broadcast unique in this media landscape is the fact that we are in the communities that we serve. So when music is played on our airwaves, we have a particular relationship with our audience and an engagement from our audience that's unequaled on any other medium. In addition to that, because we are freely available, we're allowing a reach, especially in rural areas, that other services just can't touch. So there have been study after study that have touched upon this, but the promotional value received through local radio, because of the fact that it is freely available and tethered to a local focus, is unmatched in audio.
Yeah, and I want to ask you about that. Is there any way to quantify really the value, the estimate of the value of the promotional work that local radio stations do in terms of the personnel time, the airplay, the other expenses that go into that?
Yeah, so a number of studies have tried to do this. We've estimated that dollar figure as high as $2.4 billion nationally in promotional value, but I think it's safer to say billions of dollars in promotional value. It is simply unmatched, and no doubt that the way that listeners consume music has changed dramatically over the course of radio's history, as has the entire economy and media landscape. But we are still driving, whether it's what you would have called 20 years ago album sales, now is on-demand downloads. We are still driving music discovery in a way no other medium is.
And do you charge? You don't charge the artists for that promotion. I think we all know that, but could you verify that?
We do not charge artists for that promotion. There are payola laws that restrict that.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I wrestle with in this, because I understand what the artists are saying. They want to be compensated for their time and their talents, their efforts on the radio, but there is a value to this promotion that's given back to the artists, and I think that they would say the same thing. Is that what you're hearing from, say, for instance, the label promoters, the record label promoters that talk to your program directors?
Yeah, I think Mr. Harrell can speak to this more directly because he's on the receiving end of those phone calls. But you could bring any radio station representative in the country in here, and I don't think they would be telling you that promoters are asking them not to play songs on their airwaves.
Mr. Harrell, would you answer that? And then I have one more question for you as well, Mr. Harrell.
He's right. Artists are coming to us all the time, every day still, asking us to play their music. New artists, existing artists, stars. The labels will still see us. It's a symbiotic relationship between their music and our ability to publicize their music on an everyday basis.
Yeah, I've heard it for years, actually, from artists that talk about, especially when they start, how important that local community is. And a lot of times they start with a local radio station that plays their music. The American Music Fairness Act, Mr. Harrell, charges, as we've talked about, as little as $10 for some of those smaller stations. But could you explain why some of those small broadcasters are still united in opposition to this bill?
I could tell you in the media landscape, as the dollars or the top line revenue is not growing. So any new expense will cause decisions that have to be made from a small group to a large group. And what does that mean? And I think what's lost in this is some of the services and the community service we provide outside of playing our music. If you look in communities across the state of Ohio, particularly in Cincinnati, for example, we do something called Stuff the Bus, in which we collected over almost 2,000 pounds of donated items last Christmas, which we translated into over 1,500 meals to families in need. Those are the things that are lost in what we do as opposed to just playing the music. And so our ability to lead community efforts like that would be impacted by any new expense that we'd have to endure.
And I want the artists in the room to know that I do not discount the arguments that are made on the other side. They know that I'm an advocate for them in a lot of ways. The No AI Frauds Act is something that I've promoted. I think it protects artists as they develop their works against intrusive AI if they don't want to consent to that. But I want to make sure that both sides of the argument are discussed and we find a good consensus ground to move forward without a yield back.
Thank the gentleman. We now go to the gentleman. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, any chance I could follow up just briefly on the promotional issue?
If you can be very brief, Mr. Schiff is waiting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to say we recognize there may or may not be promotional value in music that is played on AM/FM, but this system takes that into account. It actually directs the rate setter to consider promotion. If the broadcasters believe the rhetoric that promotion is so valuable, then they should be confident that that would work its way out in the proceedings as a rate is set for this.
Thank the gentleman. I now go to my colleague from California, Mr. Schiff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. Mr. and Mrs. Travis, I want to start by thanking you for sharing your story with us. I'm a proud co-sponsor of the American Music Fairness Act and a strong supporter of what this bill at its core stands for and what it means to creators. My district in the state of California is home to so many creators that rely, just like you do, on performance royalty payments every time their songs are played in restaurants, through streaming services, and elsewhere, everywhere but on AM/FM radio. I echo the sentiments of many of my colleagues that support this legislation, and I'm grateful that you took the time today to share the importance of this critical effort. I'd also like to take the opportunity to ask you a little more about your most recent song, Where That Came From, which you created using generative AI to create your voice, Mr. Travis. Can you share a little more about what that process has meant to you both, and specifically how you would feel if someone else used AI to recreate your voice without your permission? What is ownership of your ability, over your ability, and what should be your ability alone to train a generative AI model on your voice? What does that mean to you?
I can tell you, it was a very emotional thing for Randy to hear his voice again. We never thought we would. He went through every human emotion there was, just like he went through every human ability to create that song. Being in the studio with his musicians, with his producer. His piece of AI work was humanistic and artistic. And that's the difference in the good and the bad AI. It meant the world to me to hear his song again. Just a moment ago when Chairman played that, I thought I was going to break out in tears again, because just to hear that voice again after so many years, something you never thought you'd get to do, is very important to us. But, the whole process was, like I said, it took 11 months. We were in brand new waters. We were treading in new waters. We didn't know exactly how this was going to happen. And in fact, when the final song was sent, after he and Kyle got through tweaking it, changing, making sure it sounded like Randy Travis, they sent it back to the gentleman that created this AI platform, and they said, we never thought it could work this well. So it was kind of enlightening for a lot of us. And I apologize, I don't remember the other part of your question.
Well, I guess the other part of my question is the flip side, and that is what goes through your head when you contemplate others using AI to recreate your husband's voice without your permission, authorization, or compensation, to produce songs you didn't write, using melodies you would not condone, and what that means in terms of the dilution of your brand.
It feels kind of like identity theft. It is intellectual property, the voice, the likeness. So it does feel like somebody has robbed you, because he has spent his whole life since he was 7 years old making music, knew that's what he wanted to do, that's all he wanted to do. So when you hear somebody on the internet or on your computer and they're saying they're pretending to be Randy Travis, and it doesn't sound like Randy Travis, it hurts. And I think that that's what all artists feel. Like I said, just like you've been robbed, just like it's identity theft. And there needs to be laws that are in place to keep that from happening, which means consent and compensation and attribution and provenance so that it doesn't happen. And it's coming up so fast now that if we don't get on the front end of it, which I'm not sure we can at this point, but if we don't get in as soon as we can to protect the artist, I'm not sure where we'll go from there.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and Mr. Travis, I only speak for many millions of people who are thrilled and grateful that you can continue to make new music. Thank you for that gift, and thank you for your testimony today.
Thank you.
I thank the gentleman, and I might remind all of my colleagues that Mr. Schiff has been a leader on transparency and AI and wanting to understand it well enough to not to over-regulate it, but to make sure that we do get what's fair for the creators and their work that's being ingested. Thank you. We now go to the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Huppy, I'd like to return to your testimony in a subject that we touched on earlier and hear more about the distinctions between United States artists and foreign artists and how they are compensated, performance rights, royalties. If you would go back to that and tell us a little bit more about the distinction, how does the United States compare with other countries with respect to foreign performance rights and how artists are treated?
Sure. Thank you, Congresswoman. That is a very excellent question. As I mentioned, the U.S. stands alone in the industrialized world as the only democratic nation that does not pay performance rights for terrestrial radio. It puts us in the company of Iran, South Korea, Cuba, and others. And because of that, because we don't compensate for that fundamental right that every other democratic industrialized world does pay around the world, because we don't do that here, as a penalty to our creators, like Mr. Travis, as a penalty, many countries overseas do not pay us that similar right in those countries. We estimate that artists are missing out on up to $300 million a year because of that lack of a reciprocity. And that's tremendous injustice that has existed for 100 years, and it's what we hope Congress will fix.
Do you have a sense, you just mentioned an estimate of $300 million a year, do you have a sense of whether that loss exceeds what would be paid to foreign artists if the policy were changed?
That's hard to say, and it's hard to estimate. If AMFA were passed, they would go through a procedure to set the rates that, by the way, mimic the free market in many ways. The way this system works, there's many parts of the industry that are in this system where rates are set, and they look at things like promotion, substitution, what's the capital investment, what do each of the parties bring to the table. So the attempt is to set a rate that as closely mimics the free market as possible. So it's impossible to sit here and say whether there would be a positive balance of trade one way or another. But I can tell you at the end of the day, this is fundamentally about just making sure that everyone deserves to be paid for their work. We have a lot of discussion up here about exemptions and foreign regulations and how the FCC does different things. I would argue that all of those sort of hide the ball. This is about as basic a concept and an American ideal that you can think of. When you have creators like the great Randy Travis who pour their heart and soul into a beautiful piece of music, and you have another entity or set of entities making $15 billion off that music, we're just looking for a fair payment for that input.
Do you have a perspective on what procedural impediments, if any, would prevent or inhibit the expansion of royalties for the performance of sound recordings to cover terrestrial radio?
I think there would be very few procedural enhancements. Indeed, it's a fairly simple law as laws go. The AMFA is, at a high level, merely removing the exemption that the broadcasters have and putting them in the same class as every other music delivery platform. As I mentioned, Spotify, SiriusXM, all of them pay the performer, and the FM, even the broadcast industry themselves, when they simulcast the exact same programming online, they also pay the performer. This would simply remove the exemption for the much larger part of their business that you've heard testimony about today, and drop them into the same treatment as all of the other platforms. So it's a fairly simple process to do that from a legislative perspective. And to be honest, it would be fairly simple to be implemented. Since we're already operationalizing and paying out on the webcasting of all of these stations, it would be administratively fairly easy to add this on top of it.
Now, Mr. Harrell, counter viewpoint, I'd like to hear from you. You mentioned something a moment ago you referred to as stuff the bus, which I think is reflective of really the greater community impacted community commitment that you see from some of these local broadcast radio stations. Tell me a little bit more of that. If the top line revenue is not growing, describe for us in a little more detail what you think is the impact or the overall loss if we were to make this change.
Congresswoman, thank you for that question. And first, I would be remiss if I did not thank Mr. Travis for his tremendous contributions to American history and to American music. I want to make sure I do that. We keep hearing treat us the same, when in fact we're not the same. We are not the same as Spotify and Pandora and other streaming services. Pandora and Spotify cannot do the things that we do on a daily basis outside of just playing music, as you mentioned. Spotify and Pandora don't get 1,000 backpacks and give them to students when they go to back to school. Pandora and Spotify don't do something we did very unique in Cleveland when we're at the height of some tension in race relations. All 21 radio stations in Cleveland, all 21, 4 competitors, agreed to stop the music and do a forum on race on all 21 stations at the same time. That's something that Pandora and Spotify cannot do. They won't do. It's not part of their model. So when you talk about us being the same, I think it would be disingenuous to not recognize the differences that we have and that what's important to us. And so our ability to do those things that are important to the communities are important as we do our daily business. When it comes to natural disasters, right now, if something was going on in my markets, because of our ability to be local, I could call in 30 seconds, have our stations flipped to talk about what's going on in our communities. You can't do that on the streaming services. So that really emphasizes why we are different.
I thank the gentleman. I'll inform everyone there are votes on the floor. The intent of the chair, and hopefully you can all stay, is to vote as quick as we can, 11 times, and come right back. So we're going to string this out as far as we can, and then the last couple of us are going to run to the vote. We'll vote 11 times, hopefully 2 minutes per, and come back if you can all remain. With that, the gentlelady from Pennsylvania is next.
I thank you, Chairman Issa and Ranking Member Johnson, for holding this hearing. I thank all of you for your work and your testimony before us today. I have to admit to you, I'm glad to hear so much about the bill that I'm very connected to, one of the co-authors of, which is No AI Fraud. And while I know artists in the music industry and so many others who are performers are in support of that, I hope you know I'm doing it also as a mother and a grandmother. Because what No AI Fraud does is it provides a property right to our voice and our likeness. So whether it's my granddaughter or it's me, ordinary folks, we have that property right as well. But it certainly works in terms of this industry that is so important to our country. Mr. Travis and Mrs. Travis, thank you so much for your testimony. Thank you for your talent. Thank you for your storytelling. That is the basis of beautiful music, is great writing and performing and, of course, storytelling. When I was reading about this and preparing for this hearing, as I say, I come at AI with a fear. How do we protect ourselves? But look at what you are doing. As a result of your experience, as a result of the tragic, heartbreaking stroke, etc., that you suffered, you're turning that heartbreaking experience into something that is so hope-filled. The resurrection of your unique talent. And so I think it's a time of extraordinary challenge, but also opportunity. What are some of the primary challenges that artists face in this climate, changing climate with AI? And I wonder, do you have other artists who talk to you as a result of your generating these beautiful new works about how it affects them? Maybe they haven't had the devastating health consequences that you've had. So what are your experience? What are other artists saying?
We have spoken to several other artists. As a matter of fact, we had 8 or 10 artists come to listen to Randy's song when it first came out, a day or two before it was finally on the radio. It's mixed because they are like you and I, we're mothers. We have children, and it scares you to death what AI can do. You hear it all the time about the older generation that's taken advantage of through AI voice, and you know, the grandson's in jail and needs money. It's just been fraud as far as bank accounts. So it scares you to death. But I guess that's with so much technology, so many changes that we've had in the world. There's the good and there's the bad, and it just depends on whose hands it's in as to where it goes. There was, I think, the artists, from their standpoint, if they haven't been through anything tragic, as in Randy's case, where it took his voice, it took his livelihood, I don't know that they have, many of them have embraced it. A lot don't know, and it's the fear of the unknown that we're all going through this. I think that if we can set a precedence, if we can be a model to how it should be used for good in music, if it is consent of the artist, if it has the artist, like I said before, the heart in it, if the human touch is in it, then I think it can be really exciting for a lot of people. But bad use is something that we all need to be on top of, which goes back to why we need to have something. We need laws so that we have, we can go and stop somebody from doing what they're doing if it's fraudulent. Right now, we really don't have that.
And I'm wondering if you're going through the process of generating that work has instructed you as to some of the guardrails that ought to be there. I love some of the language that you eloquently used, that it feels like you were a point of light for artists and fans in this new chapter, that point of light. As you're working through it, I know that we would benefit from hearing where were the vulnerable points? How is it you control your own voice, your image, your likeness, your sound? Through where that came from, maybe you could give us, this committee, because you can see we have a bipartisan support around this issue. And we're very happy for the point of light that is you. That reminds me that all AI isn't bad. I don't have to come at it as a crazed grandmother. And I guess, my time is up. Again, thank you all for being here today. Thank you for your talent, Mr. Travis.
Thank you so much.
Never to be called a crazed grandmother. We now go to the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massey.
Well, Chairman Jordan said there were two kinds of music in his house growing up. He grew up in Ohio. He said country and western. In the county I grew up in, Kentucky, the two kinds of music you could choose between were bluegrass and gospel. So that may just be Kentucky, the part that I was in. I think anybody here could answer this question, but I'm going to go to Mr. Harrell. What is the Copyright Royalty Board, and what do they do?
Congressman, I'm going to pass on that question.
Oh, okay. Let me ask.
Okay.
I just want to ask somebody who knows or feels comfortable answering.
Well, I think this underscores some of the point, which is that when you are an operator of local stations, the complexity of everything happening in terms of where these copyright fees come from is just lost. What it means to a local station is the simplicity of what is the degree of the check that I'm writing, and how is it taking away from my ability to serve communities. But what the Copyright Royalty Board does is that for certain types of, in this case, public performances that have been designated by Congress, it sets a rate. So for non-interactive streaming services, Pandora is an example. If a broadcaster is simulcasting its over-the-air programming, on the internet. The user can't just pick a song on demand the way that they can with Spotify. That falls into a category here where the Copyright Royalty Board, a three-judge panel within the Copyright Office, hears a case every 5 years to set rates.
And so, we've got an example here of White Christmas. Bing Crosby did it, Garth Brooks did it, and Bette Midler did it. I'm leaving some people out, I'm sure. Everybody's done it at home, right? But they're not trying to copyright. Would they all get paid the same price under the Copyright Royalty Board for all those versions? Or are there different prices for each of those? Mr. Huppy.
Sure, thank you, Congressman. It depends on the system. The Copyright Royalty Board is a system that Congress set up. They've been using something like this. Maybe it had a different name, but they've been using this type of rate-setting tribunal for over 100 years. It's a system that operates in many areas of copyright law, both in the music area and others. And it's a system that has a lot of benefits to both parties. I think it's working fairly well. In fact, Congress reaffirmed their belief in this system just in 2018 with the Music Modernization Act, where they created a whole nother system and a whole nother right that is being administered by this panel of judges. The idea behind it is to deal in a very efficient way with the entire industry plays.
So to my question, I'm thankful for that information, but would Garth Brooks and Bette Midler get the same fee price?
In general, on the sound recording side, when the CRB operates with what Sound Exchange does, streaming radio on the digital world, artists are treated very fairly across the board.
No, that's not what I'm asking.
The answer is yes. They get the
So
same.
They're paid the same price, and you're saying fair, but everybody has a different version of fair.
Fair enough.
And so you said something before about mimicking the free market. If we're going to revisit things that have been assumed for 100 years, why should we assume a tribunal should be deciding what's fair? That doesn't sound American to me. In fact, I think if you went and asked the artists, we keep asking this question, who benefits under this regime and who benefits under the new regime? I bet if you asked 100 artists, performers would tell you, would break it down differently as to the benefit of the promotional aspect of it, or the royalties that they want to enjoy after they've quit making music. So when you get to a situation where everybody has a different answer, instead of mimicking the free market with the three-person tribunal, I'm just going to ask a crazy question. Why not have a free market where an artist could decide, okay, is it benefit to me to play on radio for free? Or maybe I'm sure Randy Travis would probably fetch a better price than my neighbor who thinks he can sing. But they would. Could we have something where there are different prices? It just doesn't. We're comparing things to these dictatorships or whatever, and I'm wondering, where is the free market here, Mr. Leggett?
Well, certainly, as you point out, and thank you for the question, Congressman, as well as your support for the Local Radio Freedom Act, the CRB, where you've got a one-size-fits-all government-imposed fee, is not a free market, right? And the backstop to any free market negotiation outside of that is that CRB set rate, so that is not a free market. At the same time, when you're thinking about an industry like broadcast, where you have 15,000 stations across the country and literally thousands of different ownership groups, there are certainly some efficiencies gained by a bit of a one-stop shop here, right? And the idea that there would be individual marketplace negotiations between all of them would be difficult to achieve.
But 20 years ago, the idea that you'd be on the internet bidding against somebody on the other side of the world for something on eBay that should be at a flea market was inconceivable, or that you wouldn't have taxis, you'd be using a device in your hand. So anyways, I'm just saying, maybe there's a solution here we haven't thought of that involves the free market. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and this is why we always have at least one libertarian on the committee, so that can be heard and understood. And we do have that, obviously, in the motion picture industry, where it is a willing buyer, willing seller. It's probably the reason that, among other things, you didn't hear any of Elvis's movie Elvis's music in the movie Priscilla. Just saying that the movie would have been better with a little bit of Elvis. With that, the chairman and ranking member regret to tell you that we do have to vote still. Only the speaker doesn't have to vote. So for that, we are going to take a recess of as short as possible. If any of you have to leave, we will regret your not being here, but we are taking you past the appropriate time. And so we're gonna recess. You're welcome either for the witnesses to come in the back, but we will come back. The votes are 11, but since we've exhausted the time for the first one, and we're gonna run, and then each one is roughly, they call it 2, but call it 3 or 4 minutes. The fact is, we'll be back in well less than an hour, and we'll come back the moment I can gavel in. So thank you for your indulgence. We stand in recess.
Take your time. bruise easily. Take it easy on me. My words don't come easily. Just pardon my poor memory. And when you close the door, will it be like before? I learned to hear much more. 'Cause I bruise easily. I look out on an empty street with hollow eyes. Will I hold you in my arms on the southern skies? I wish that I could tell you exactly how I feel. All my feelings an illusion, or are they really real? 'Cause I bruise easily. Take it easy on me. My words don't come easily. Just pardon my poor memory. And when you close the door, will it be like before? I learned to hear much more. 'Cause I bruise easily. just be easy. The struggle's gone on too long. And what's the use in dreaming? 'Cause every day I'm all alone. Somebody please help me. Will you help me? 'Cause I'm falling apart. Falling apart. Somebody please help me. Will you help me? 'Cause I'm falling apart. Falling apart. Can't go on. turn to schemes. I had a friend, oh, he became a stranger. Hid from the world, lived a life high on danger. He made promises, but they were all just lies. And he broke the promises, bringing tears to their eyes. And he made promises that he could never ever keep. Breaking his promises, disappointment runs deep. He made promises, but they were all just lies. And he broke the promises, bringing tears to their eyes. And he made promises that he could never ever keep. On breaking his promises, and the bad blood runs deep. And he made promises, but they were all just lies. And he broke the promises, bringing tears to my eyes. And he made promises that he could never ever keep. And breaking his promises, and the bad blood runs deep. If you only had one day on the earth, would you serve it? Why? You let your friends and all the humans, and you grab
guests. We're going to go right to Mr. Johnson now, and then we'll deal with other members when they arrive. The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this very important hearing. Mr. Huppe?
Huppy, sir.
Mr. Huppe, I'm sorry.
No worries.
Unlike albums...
That's not the worst. It's been bastardized, so it's all good.
Yeah, I could come up with a few other more humorous pronunciations. But unlike album sales, which have dropped drastically over the past 20 years, broadcast radio use has remained relatively popular over that same period. According to Pew Research data, the percentage of Americans aged 12 or older who listen to traditional or terrestrial radio in a given week fell just 10 percentage points between 2009 and 2022. How would you respond to concerns that adding a performance royalty for terrestrial radio broadcasts would make it harder for local radio stations who are so far weathering the changes in technology pretty well? How would you meet that argument that this will hurt the ability of broadcast radio stations to stay afloat?
Thank you, Ranking Member. That's an excellent question. And I think it's fair to say broadcast radio does all of these things in other formats and manages to turn a profit and do all the things that they do. And music radio is the largest part of their revenue. People go to music radio to listen to music radio. Truly local, and truly small and independent broadcasters are accommodated in the bill, as we've discussed before. Any broadcaster making $1.5 million or less that is not part of a huge conglomerate pays merely $500 a year, which is less than the cost of a candy bar every day for all the music that they need. And I think that's what the public clamors. That's what people want when they listen to music radio. And there's been a lot of discussion about promotion throughout this hearing, but the fact of the matter is promotion will be taken into account in all of this process. So I think that we would not see a drop-off in radio by having to pay a performance royalty.
Thank you, Mr. Legit. How much money would it cost the average station that produces revenues in excess of $1.5 million annually? What would be the average performance royalty rate that it would pay yearly, given the number of songs that you can, I'm sure, talk about they play? In other words, we know that certain number of songs get played within a certain period of time every day, and then calculating those numbers, you should be able to determine how much in performance royalties an average radio station that produces income in excess of $1.5 million would have to pay.
Well, thank you for the question. It's a little bit difficult to answer, but I'm going to do my best in this regard. The current, if you're taking the current CRB framework that applies to our streaming, which is a per play, per listener measurement, and you just extrapolated that onto terrestrial radio, you are talking about millions of dollars in royalties per station. And scale that up, especially if you're talking about the most popular stations in the country. And that has a real impact on those local stations' ability to serve their communities.
So of the $15 billion annually that the broadcast industry takes in, about there would be millions of dollars that would be paid out. Is that what you're saying in performance royalties?
Across the entire industry, millions understates it. Again, if you are applying the calculation that today applies to webcasting over to broadcast, the legislation, in fairness to the legislation, doesn't set a particular rate. It obviously sets some criteria for the rate, but it would be a devastating number under any scenario that matches what the CRB is currently doing. We've already seen that in webcasting, those rates are unsustainable for local broadcasters. It's a major inhibition in broadcasters' ability to innovate in streaming.
I would be remiss if I wish that I could hear from you in response. Can we?
Please go ahead.
All right, thank you.
Respectfully, I would have a different view on that. It's when the rates are set by the CRB, the point they try to do is look at all the factors, one of which is the licensee's ability to pay. So the CRB will take into account what is the level of promotion, how much does the licensee contribute, what is the cost and benefit, what does everybody bring to the table, and the CRB will take that into account when they set the rate and set a rate that is affordable for the broadcasters.
All right, and last but not least, I'd simply want to say that I hope that we can continue to listen to the music of Randy Travis, both his new music and his legacy music, which I would be remiss not to recite at this time. Oh man, gosh. You know what?
To be played later. He'll be here.
But
the gentleman
forever and ever, amen.
Amen.
And let me add how much local radio across the country, particularly country radio, but frankly your popularity transcends country, looks forward to promoting all of your new work.
And we now go to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is quite an occasion to have Mr. Travis and Mrs. Travis here with us. A very popular icon, really, across Western, Southwestern, and West Virginia. But we're honored to have you here today. You know, my district runs from Roanoke in the south to Winchester in the north, and it boasts many songwriters and recording artists who began their lives and musical careers in our part of Virginia. That's why I'm chair of the Songwriters Caucus. And you know, we have folks like Matthew Ramsey and Whit Sellers from the band Old Dominion, who both grew up in Botetourt County, and the Statler brothers from Stanton, and of course Patsy Cline, who is no relation, from Winchester. In fact, Patsy Cline's first performance, professional performance, began when she was just 15 years old at the local radio station WINC, which is still in operation today. So we're also lucky to have many good local radio stations in the district, 3 different markets, Roanoke, Harrisonburg, and even ones that make their way up toward DC. So we want to protect the rights of IP, of our recording artists, while also appropriately factoring in the good work our local radio broadcasters do for our communities. But let me ask Mr. and Mrs. Travis first. You talked about how the shift from physical sales of albums to online streaming has impacted your livelihood and that of other recording artists. Has the shift in listeners' way of finding new music affected the balance between the benefits of radio play and the loss of royalties?
Can you put your mic a little
So
closer,
sorry.
Mary? Thank you.
I'm sorry. The benefit of streaming versus radio, and is that your question?
How has listeners' way of finding new music affected the balance between the benefits of radio play and the loss of royalties?
The streaming platforms have been extremely, they pay well. I mean, and Randy is streamed. If people like the music, they're going to find the music. So, but the royalties that are, and I think we just heard that there's millions of dollars a year, hundreds of millions, I think he said, that the artists are missing out on. That's not something that makes us feel real good about.
Does the failure to
When we-
pay royalties to recording artists for radio play while paying songwriters for that same radio play have any effect on decisions to record your own music versus having other artists record music you've written?
It's always something in the forefront of an artist's mind. Some artists just don't write, but they sing. Preferably, yes, you would write and you would perform, and that way you would ascertain being paid. But what I would like for people to remember is we were speaking about the smaller radio stations in the smaller areas. I had a grandfather that had one in Whitfield, Virginia, years ago. So I understand that, but they also have to understand that artists are small businesses too. And they have crews, and they have bands, and they have travel. They've got a lot of overhead, insurance. There's so many things that go into them trying to make a livelihood along with the families of their crew and their band. So we understand the small business struggles, and when you perform and you're not paid, it makes it hard to make ends meet.
Well, to that end, I'll go to Mr. Harrell. On page 3 of your testimony, you point out several celebrities in talk radio who have programming on Radio 1. Ricky Smiley, Dale Hughley, Incognito, Willie Moore Jr. Does Radio 1 pay these personalities for their work, or do they simply benefit from the publicity that their appearances provide?
Congressman, thank you for that question. So they do get paid for their work. And I would also add that they're, in addition to the on-air work that they do, they are ambassadors in their cities.
Why does radio pay talkers for content but not artists?
Because they're representatives of the community and they're part of our staff. They are going to job fairs and health fairs. They're going to visit kids in local hospitals. They're going to small businesses and doing remotes for car dealerships. So they are not just talent on the radio. They're part of their ambassadors in the markets in which we do business, and they're part of our staff.
But you concede that artists do participate as well, providing a community benefit and engaging in different volunteer activities?
Artists, yes, but I would say that we provide a benefit to the artists as well, not only with the airplay, but in partnerships we have with artists that we pay them as well. And I have a couple examples with events that we do across the country at which we actually pay artists.
Thank you. Yield back.
Just for clarification, you also play syndicated things. I mentioned Rush Limbaugh earlier, but you have syndicated talk radio, correct? So they don't get involved in the community. They're not even in your cities, are they?
Well, they're very involved. I mean, some of our talent will travel to different markets depending on ranking member, or chairman. But they do. They do.
Depending upon the Congress, it changes.
They do participate in our events around the country.
Okay, thank you. Gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Ivey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Harrell, I want to say hello, welcome you. Radio 1 is, I represent Prince George's County, Maryland, right at the eastern border of Washington, D.C., and you guys are major forces in our community, and Radio 1, back when Ms. Hughes got started and before it was Radio 1, she's been a huge player even since then. I was explaining to one of our interns yesterday how she got started and the impact that she had and continues to have. I want to follow up on Ranking Member Johnson's questions about figuring this out from a dollars and cents standpoint, because I think we've heard, not everybody on the committee, but many members who are saying, it'd be great if we could work something out here, something that gives some kind of a combination to the artists, but obviously, certainly I don't want to see Radio 1 go out of business, or I want to see it continue to thrive. Matter of fact, I'd love to have you all move your offices back to Prince George's County, but that's another conversation. But I did want to press it a little bit, though, with Mr. Leggett and Mr. Hoppe about figuring it out. So, because we've got contractual arrangements with respect to Spotify and the like, where that was resolved. In fact, tell me, what is that arrangement that's in place with Spotify?
Well, Spotify typically operates under direct licenses with the owners of the sound recording. So they're a much more complex and interactive service than just a radio service like our FM colleagues to the right. They typically have to go directly to the record labels and get the rights. And I just want to say one thing following up, Congressman, on your comment. We don't want radio to disappear either. We recognize the value of radio in our ecosystem. I think in many ways we could have a symbiotic relationship if this bill were to pass. And we also salute all that you've heard in terms of what they do about community work and, charitable efforts. Our only point is, we don't know why the artist should have to support all of that. Why should Randy Travis have to be the one to bear the load of this community effort and all of the charitable work? But we would love a solution where FM radio can thrive because they are an important part of the ecosystem. We are simply asking that they pay fairly for the artists that form the basis of their business.
Mr. Leggett?
Thank you for the question and the dialogue. NAB, over the course of the last several Congresses, and Chairman Ison knows this, Ranking Member Johnson knows this, has been at the table willing to have conversations about how to grow the pie while resolving the issue that is the subject of this hearing. From our perspective, that means more airplay on broadcast and broadcast-related assets. That growth is going to happen in streaming. The current rules and royalty rates in streaming are inhibiting music airplay on broadcast and our ability to really expand in that space. So when I look at a potential solution...
Explain that to me.
Absolutely. I mean, when we talk about what makes local broadcast unique, what we can't do that every one of these other streaming services does is charge a subscription. And we also can't nationalize our programming or we lose our competitive advantage. Our advantage is all the principles that you just articulated. We're embedded in these communities. We are trusted. We are there times of emergency. We are there in the lead up to an event. We are there during the event, reporting on it on the ground. Cell phone systems go down, and we're there in the aftermath to help communities rebuild. All of that is broadcast's unique value proposition, but it means human beings in every market in the country, not some algorithm that can be consumed and just distribute music because a particular user logs in. So for us, we certainly see benefits to expanding our reach through streaming. The royalties that have been set by the CRB are inhibiting broadcasters' embrace of it. So when we have talked about a holistic solution, I'd love one that makes that expansion more affordable. I think that will mean more airplay, more listeners, and more royalties for everyone.
All right. And does the current legal or regulatory regime prevent that from happening? Do you need help from Congress to try and create a scenario where there could be a resolution that's worked out that does grow the pot?
Well,
I'll start with Mr. Hopp.
All right, Congressman, thank you for entertaining that. We have at times tried to sit down with our good colleagues on the broadcast side. I think let's call it what it is. We recognize that we are the political underdogs in this fight. Radio is incredibly powerful, and every time we've tried to do that, their play is to run out the clock and get to the next Congress.
We've got a conference room right back here. We could go sit down and start working it out now if you want.
I take significant issue with this. We've made very clear to the leadership of this committee that we'd like to be engaged in conversations. We had 2 rounds of them last Congress, and then once again, the recording industry didn't provide the support to those conversations to keep them going. So NAB stands ready, willing to be in a conference room. It does, I will concede here, my version of a middle ground here is very different than what Mr. Huppy's version of a middle ground is. But I do think if we are viewing this through the lens of what is good for listeners, what is good for local communities, and what is good for artists, we can find a solution here. We can find a win-win. And I will be in that conference room with you, ready for my colleagues in the recording industry to put a proposal on the table.
Excellent. Well, Mr. Chairman, I yield back, but I think that's an opportunity that we might want to try and take them up on. And I know that the full committee chairman expressed similar kind of interest in seeing
We could even use the big conference room.
You guys get to use it. Democrats don't right now, but
we'll share. And with that, we go to the gentleman in South Carolina, Mr. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ivey offered a conference room. If you need boxing gloves, we have those too, right? Thank you guys for being here. I know it's long day. I've got a couple questions. What do you think the impact, this is for the whole panel, and you've talked about this, but I want to hear it again. What do you think the whole, what the impact would be of a performance royalty imposed on local radio stations like the ones I represent in South Carolina? We'll start right here. You, Mrs. Travis. What would the impact be to local radio stations in South Carolina or Tennessee or Texas, wherever? What do you think the impact would be if we were to do this legislation?
I think that there is a way to be a lot more collaborative, a lot more cooperative, work together. I guess the bottom line is it's right or wrong, it's principle, it's not getting paid for work that's done. If it was just a little stipend, a little royalty for each time they use their song, they would be more willing to work together. There is a way to make a collaborative approach to this so that everybody can win. I don't think that they would fall apart if they had to share some of their royalties. I'm not so sure that it wouldn't increase their revenues, it wouldn't their listenership. But
Thank you for that.
artists play lots of charities also. And I know that they're speaking of all of the things that radio does in their communities. Artists do the same thing, and the same tornadoes or storms that they're talking about, that they're reporting on, the artists are the ones that come along and they'll have a benefit fundraiser for their community. So they're working together, just on different ends. If they can
Thank you for
figure something out.
Appreciate
Sorry.
that.
And Congress, if I could respond.
For the three of you, if we can just move quickly, because I know we got limited time and I want to hunt the chairman a couple of minutes.
Congressman, at the end of the day, as we said, we've made accommodations for truly small and independent local radio. This is just about making sure that everybody gets paid who provide input into the output. The broadcasters, when it's their property at issue, they're very, very ardent about trying to get paid for it, whether it's retransmission consent or getting special treatment for their news content when used by Google and others. They're worried about their content and their property when it comes to the dealing with AI. So when it is their property at issue, they're very, very focused on it. I just, for the life of me, don't know why they don't recognize that is how Randy Travis and others feel about their own property.
Right.
Just like they want to be paid for third-party use of their property, Randy wants to be paid for third-party use of his. And it's very hard to have a one-sided negotiation when there's no property right at all.
So the why in answering that question is because every one of those policies that we're advocating, including for the Local Radio Freedom Act here, are about enabling our local stations to serve their communities. We right now, in this media landscape, I don't need to tell this panel, are the most trusted media. We are freely available, and we have a reach that no other media has. And so that fight, our policy agenda is about ensuring that we have the means to be able to support those local communities and to be able to provide them a trusted source of information, news, investigative journalism that they're not getting anywhere else.
Mr. Leggett, while I've got you here, can you describe the impact from a national weather, say a national weather event in South Carolina, what the impact would be, how this bill might impact your ability to serve the public in that regard?
Thank you for the question. What we do in local communities, both in the lead up to a major natural disaster, reporting, making sure communities are prepared for it, during the disaster when other forms of communication fail, staying on the air, people in our stations, people out there dealing with very extreme conditions, and then in the aftermath, helping communities to rebuild. That is something that is unique to broadcast radio and television. No one else in this music ecosystem, certainly not these international streaming services, are doing that. And that takes people, and it takes equipment, and there are real costs associated with it. Mr. Huppy misrepresents the way the broadcast industry currently works. It is not as if there's an independent business for a music format station, an independent business for news, an independent business for sports. These most often are clusters, all of which a cost to one means less service for all. So if the service that you're getting from a local radio station in a time of disaster is something that you believe stands out in communities all across the country, I believe it does.
Let me ask you this, and I've got
this will undermine it.
A little bit of time left, Mr. Chairman, if I can have. How do you respond then, and just curious, and again, I'm still kind of formulating this issue, but how do you respond to other countries not doing it the way that we do it? Like that out of the democratic countries in the world, that we're the only one that do it this way. I mean, why should we not adopt a different model? Just curious, your thoughts on that.
Those other democratic countries don't have a commercial, locally focused broadcast system that rivals what the U.S. has in local communities. They have nationalized syndicated broadcast radio, or they have government-funded broadcast radio. That's the comparison we are making here. So the resources that it takes to enable a freely available, locally focused model are significant. Public policy in the United States has recognized that, both in the Communications Act and the copyright laws. This is not a loophole. It is a well-considered, thought-out exemption to say terrestrial radio is different than these streaming services. And I think it's also important to state, because sometimes it gets taken for granted, when we are saying no pay, broadcasters, we are paying the songwriters when we are airing these songs. We are paying significant royalties, hundreds of millions of dollars to ASCAP, BMI, and the like. We are also paying when we do the public performance that is more like our streaming competitors. We pay the same way that they do. We paid $70 million as an industry to Sound Exchange last year when we're streaming, but terrestrial radio is different.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chairman. I yield, but before I do that, I would also encourage the boxing gloves in the conference room. Thank you.
And with that, the chair recognizes himself. This has been a good hearing. Yes, it has been a repeat of some things we've seen in the past. But let me kind of close and try to create a little different environment closing. And Randy, Mary, thank you for everything you've done that's made this special. And I do want to continue seeing a lot more of yours and others' AI creations. And you're going to see on the copyright side a real effort, much more bipartisan even than today, to support and make that happen. And that's where the broadcasters are actually in sync with your efforts and desires. But let me just go through a little bit of the behind the scenes as I see it, because I want to be accurate. And I'm going to go to Mr. Harrell. You represent the business here. You know that NAB has been negotiating on your behalf, right? And is it fair to say that you and your stations would be willing to pay something to get this problem to go away?
Mr. Chairman, I would not say that. I would say that I would go back to the fact to recognize what we already pay.
Okay, so I'm going to take you at exactly what you just said. So, Mr. Leggett, you've been saying you've been negotiating in good faith. Is it true that you have never made an offer to the performers that gave them a net increase in their revenue, sans some sort of hypothetical growth? In other words, in all cases, you've wanted to negotiate what they already have going down in return for getting off of zero on terrestrial broadcast. Is that fair?
No, it's not fair, because I take them at their word, although it remains unsubstantiated, that they believe that there are $300 million in international royalties.
No, but I'm not going to deal with what's going to come out of somebody's pocket. I just came back from Europe. There's a high chance that the Europeans would look at anything we do and reciprocate, meaning if it's not in good faith increasing, they would find reasons to delay or not pay. So, but plus on top of that, that's not your pocket of money. That's a separate batch of money for their creation outside the U.S. We're dealing with the U.S. copyrights and your U.S. use. If you had Canadian stations, you'd be paying in Canada. If you had Mexican stations, you'd be paying in Mexico. And I've been to both those countries. They are substantially more similar than NAB would imply. I got to tell you, I've listened to local radio in Canada, so I don't know why they're not given credit for having real radio stations. Matter of fact, the station in Windsor, which you can listen to in Detroit, which is pretty darn good, it does pay, even if it's overlaps into the United States. So there is some royalties coming to the Travises. It just comes from a Windsor, Canada station that happens to cross the border. So setting the record straight, as of right now, neither the practitioners nor NAB are willing to offer a net additional amount. So I'm going to switch to a business question. You have to deal with us every year, and you have to deal with the fact that streaming is increasing. It's becoming more a part of yours. It is the only revenue that these folks have. Clearly, when they're setting royalty rates, they understand that terrestrial isn't paying, that you're just promoting. So I've got two questions. One, which goes to the streaming. Is it fair to say that your streaming is promoting your terrestrial on occasions? Isn't that true? Isn't it true that there's no way to get around the fact that those community people and everything else that's paying on streaming, they're also promoting people going back and turning the tuner on when they're in a radio that doesn't have streaming for some reason? Isn't that fair?
Mr. Chairman, I would argue that we are actually causing it the other way around.
No, I didn't say that you're not promoting your streaming, but isn't it the ultimate in, you're under oath, okay? You're supposed to say the truth. Can you truthfully say that there's no benefit to your broadcasters of your streaming, that there's no benefit passing over, that no one ever streams and then turns to AM or FM radio and listens to it because they already like your music or your DJ or whoever?
Mr. Chairman, local broadcasters need to
I would like
engage
an
our
answer to that
audiences.
question. I just want a fair answer because.
Oh, I'm agreeing with you. We need to engage our audiences through every mechanism possible, whether it's our terrestrial, our stream, social media. Our local engagement is everywhere, and the stream is a part of that.
So I'm gonna close this, and I'm gonna close it with the following. I've been here 24 years at the end of this Congress, including 2 years that I was absent and working down the street for the administration. I'm tired of this coming. I'm less tired than Frank Sinatra would be if he were still alive, since he came here in the 60s to ask for this fairness. I would strongly suggest that the record of this hearing will remain, and I will write it, it will remain that NAB did not offer one net penny, that their negotiations were only on a net savings or certainly no increase. And that the idea, and WERE, I grew up on it. I grew up on all of that. My mom still listens to she won't call them anything but the Cleveland Indians, and she does have to get it streaming. The fact is that there ought to be an amount that you're at least willing to come to the table and say, look, we'd like to get a deal on streaming. We know we have to negotiate that. But if you spend $1,500 or $2,000 or $3,000 or probably $10,000 or $15,000 in your dues to NAB, the idea that you couldn't give an offer of a flat rate substantially similar, which is partly what our legislation every year envisions for many, and if we were offered a deal for all, we'd be looking at it fairly favorably to make this go away. That would make a difference. I will say that I was in business for more than 20 years, and I followed a man named Mark McCormick. His books are long forgotten, perhaps, but he said something that is so profound that it has to be repeated every chance I get. A problem is something money won't solve. Everything else is a business decision. And I would tell you that if the recording artist began today aggressively encouraging people to only listen to your streaming, to only go to places in which they were being treated fairly, if they went on with a national program to out you for not being willing to pay one penny, you might find that it costs your business far more than a modest concession or a transition that might go decades. I will tell you that at least this chair and the ranking member of the full committee, we stand ready to negotiate fairly small amounts to change a principle to get this behind us. And if you don't take that, then quite frankly, you have to live with the consequences. Now, Mr. Kiley has showed up, and he is a good friend and fellow Californian, so he's going to take the gavel, and he's going to close this as the chairman, because I never gavel out one of my members. So, Kevin, come on up here. You're now the chairman. Thank you very much, Mary and Randy. It has been the pleasure of a lifetime. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, I got
You're closing and you're in charge.
I got a little more than I bargained for here, but I do appreciate the chair putting on this hearing, and I just wanted to ask a couple questions for my own sort of further insight into the issue. I'm fairly torn on this issue because on the one hand, I'm very sympathetic to the rights holders, and it does seem there is some level of arbitrariness in the law. On the other hand, I think that anytime you sort of redefine what the scope of a right is when there's been reliance interest built up over a long time, that creates some disruption that could have some far-reaching consequences. Though balanced against that, I'll say there are times when we have occasion to sort of rethink the scope of rights and how they relate to one another. And perhaps with the way the world is changing right now, when it comes to AI and other technologies, maybe this is such a time. So I just invite, well, first of all, I'd like to, Mr. Harrell, if you might give me just sort of a better understanding, and I'm sure this was covered to some extent earlier in the hearing, of what exactly the financial impact and the impact on the viability of local radio across the country might be if some of the proposed changes were made. I mean, I think that local radio is sort of a unique public good that serves many purposes, so that's of concern to me. But then I'd invite anyone else on the panel to comment on any of the other considerations that I've raised to the extent they haven't been covered in the hearing.
So, Congressman, thank you. Any new performance royalty on top of what we already pay will cause us to cut local staff, which will decrease our efforts around community service and diminish the safety net that we provide in the communities that we serve. I had the unique opportunity prior to coming to Radio 1 to serve as the CEO of the Columbus Urban League. And we have many community services that we provide as a nonprofit organization. And I benefited, and our community benefited firsthand because of our relationship with Radio 1 and the local broadcasters to support the things that we wanted to do, whether it was gun buybacks, or health fairs, or job fairs. So I know firsthand the impact of radio, local radio, because of my experience as a nonprofit CEO. So those are the things we continue to do today, and any performance royalty or any other fee on top of what the millions that we already pay will diminish our capacity to provide these services in communities around the country.
Mr. Chairman, the legal copyright regime that governs terrestrial radio, to address one of your questions, is not arbitrary. In the 1990s, as Congress was grappling with the copyright laws that ought to govern public performance on what were then new emerging streaming services, Congress took the step of establishing a unique performance right in the sound recording for streaming and satellite services, effectively over the course of several years. Prior to that, public performance, the payment, and broadcasters for the last 100 years have paid a royalty to the songwriter. At the time that Congress considered that change in law for the digital services, there was an explicit exemption granted for local broadcast because we are freely available. We can't pass along a fee through expensive subscription services. There's no expensive data fees. And we are community-based. So there are unique considerations that I would say when we talk about all of the changes in the media landscape and adaptations that happened in 1971, 1995, and again, as we're looking at AI, Congress needs to account for with new technologies. What hasn't changed is what broadcast is, which is locally available, free, in the communities, with essentially the same relationship with the recording industry that we've had for the past 100 years.
Mr. Chairman, if I may respond to that, we keep hearing that this is how it's been for 100 years, 100 years, 100 years. I think it's fair to say that just because there's been inequity for 100 years is not a reason to keep it moving forward. This has been something that the recording industry has fought for decades. And I salute radio for all that they do in terms of community broad community relationships and localism and what they do in their charitable works. But at the end of the day, it's a $15 billion industry that is paying nothing to the artists that make their input. A lot has changed in those 100 years. A lot has changed in the 30 years that Mr. Leggett just referenced. What's different today? I'll tell you one thing that's different is streaming didn't make up 85% of the recorded music revenue. It makes up 85% today. That is a huge difference. Number two, you didn't have 20, 30, 40 other streaming platforms that all have to pay, competitors of the broadcasters. That was not true 40 years ago. That is true now. And you didn't have AI, where, once again, The broadcasters are looking to protect their content, and we share the need to protect all creators from abusive use by AI. But that is something that did not exist 30 years ago. And while we support and everyone in this room who is seeking to address the problems with AI and all of the bills that address that, to move forward on that and not fix what is 100-year-old stealing of the music, it just seems that Congress needs to take care of that as well as the other AI problems.
All right. Thank you very much. That concludes today's hearing. I'm sorry, Mrs. Travis, did you have?
Sorry, I was just going to add to that, and it's never too late to do the right thing, I think is something we all believe in. And where they're talking about when they negotiated, they paid writers. Why do they pay writers and not the artists? I just am having a hard time trying to decipher why it's okay to pay one party but not the singer, not the one that puts it on the radio, because if he didn't sing it, then the writer's work stays in a drawer somewhere.
Well, thank you very much. That concludes today's hearing. On behalf of Chairman Issa, I'd like to thank all our witnesses for appearing before the committee today. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witnesses or additional materials for the record. Without objection, the hearing is adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.